Hey guys, welcome to week 37 of theunderwaterrealm.com. We're in the desert in southern Egypt, right the way down towards the Sudanese border, and we've actually had a really good week of shooting. We've wrapped the Red Sea shoot just last night on our last dives. Can't dive today because there's too much nitrogen in our blood. We need to dissolve all of that before we get on the flight and change pressure. So we are currently in the desert with some Bedouin and riding these charming camels. So having a great time, and looking forward to getting back to the UK, where apparently it's 6 degrees and frosty. Having a great time.
Okay, hey, so you've just seen a kind of sneak peek of what we've been getting up to this week in Egypt for our dive in the Red Sea, which was the penultimate part of this first block of principal photography for the Underwater Realm. To set the scene, we took a couple of actors. We had Kate Hollywood and Dan Richardson, who came out with us. They were playing the parts of a honeymooning couple set in the present day as they go on their honeymoon scuba diving in the Red Sea. Now, in theory, this is going to be one of the easiest parts of our shoot for the Underwater Realm. Primarily because our actors, because they're scuba diving and it's set in the present day, can be on scuba gear the whole time, and so we can film them while they're breathing, which is something that we don't have a luxury for the rest of the shoots, and we're having to do everything on breath holds with lots of safety divers around to make sure that people can be given air at exactly the right moment. Now, although that means that yes, it might arguably be one of the easiest, we still underestimated exactly how tough this shoot was going to be. And I think the number one thing that we missed on was the ticking clock aspect. Every single member of the team has a tank strapped to their back with a finite amount of air in it, and that air is getting chewed through very, very quickly, especially when we're doing a scene that involves people chasing each other around or even screaming and wasting air in that regard. Or with a lot of physical effort underwater, you use your air much, much faster than you would on a normal recreational scuba dive, which makes every second count. Now, we're used to this on every film shoot. Obviously, it's imperative that you are as efficient as is physically possible, but this is a whole nother level. This is 10 times more difficult and more critical than it ever has been on a film shoot we've done before. Now, one of the fundamentals here is communications. Communications is vital to any film shoot, as anybody will tell you. Being able to communicate across different units using radios, or even just being able to walk up to your actors and really kind of talk them through a scene will give you much, much better results. And we were obviously aware of this beforehand and decided to combat it using technology. We had every member of the crew either on a full face mask, which allowed them to talk and listen to other people talking, or in some cases, for example, the actors, they were able to listen to what we were saying while still using more traditional scuba gear. Now, although we had thought of that beforehand and we'd put all that technology communications in place, it's just not the same as being able to walk up to somebody and talk to them on land. You have to speak very, very slowly between breaths. You lose a lot of the inflection and a lot of the subtleties of the way you communicate with people, and obviously body language isn't as easy because you're having to deal with scuba kit while talking to somebody. So it's slowed everything right down, and early on in the week we're diving and we'll perhaps we'll work through a scene, we'll talk everybody through where the cameras need to be, where the actors need to be, and they'll go through one take and a couple of takes as you refine things and ask them to perhaps change the performance slightly or change the camera angle slightly. And actually what happens is that you quite easily burn through 45 minutes of air and you get one shot in the can and everybody has to come up again. Now, while you might only be in the water for 45 minutes, that dive session will take easily 3 hours. Once you've prepped all the kit, once you've got everybody on a boat, out to the dive site, dive, come back up again, come back to land, and then clean all the kit off and get it ready for the next dive. So that's a 3-hour chunk of your day, and if you go through that 3 hours and only get one shot in the can, that can be a big hit to morale as well, which is something we experienced early on in the week. Over the week, we then refined that process, and we actually progressed to a point where by the end of the week, we were going down and we'd actually managed to get as many as 8 shots in one 45-minute dive and not utter a single word underwater. And the way we achieve that is to very, very carefully structure 3, 4, 5 shots. While we're on land, we'd storyboard everything that matched exactly with the geography of the reef that we were diving on at the time, to make sure that we didn't have to hunt around for the right bit of rock or the right bit of coral. We knew exactly where we were going, we knew exactly where the camera needed to be, exactly where the talent needed to be once we got down there, and we could literally get off the boat and get down and be shooting the first shot within moments. Now, that made a really big difference, and as I say, we managed to actually complement the traditional dive symbols that we're used to with a new set of dive symbols that we developed so that everybody could communicate without uttering a word. And it meant that everybody could go down and they knew shot 1, set up here, camera this way, go. And we then work through very, very, very efficiently and come up with much better results, much better performances, and much fewer errors, far fewer errors. One of the other things that we were struggling with during the week, as well as the communications, was a very bad cold bug that was being passed around between the crew. Now that obviously causes massive issues with diving, and the general rule is if you're ill, if you're sick, you don't dive, simple as that. But when you're out there with a huge crew and a film to be shot, you've got 6 days of 3 dives a day, you don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines. Especially, I got hit with the cold pretty badly, and as the director, you can't just sit and let everybody else do the work for you, so you have to kind of push on through. Now, as you're coming back up, obviously, you're getting to the point where you're starting to run out of air, and all that air that's inside your head needs to find a way out. And that, when it's bunged up and you've got kind of congestion in your sinuses, that can be very, very painful. Which really does start to kind of rub off on the rest of the crew. You know, when the director comes up and is, you know, having a screaming headache and is generally in a bad mood as a result and bleeding quite profusely, it kind of knocks any of the gloss off being in the Red Sea, and it's such a beautiful location, and puts a lot of pressure and stress on people. But we pushed on through, and actually coming off those full-face communications masks and back to a more traditional dive mask eased those problems and actually kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. So we had a great team down there shooting all these scenes, and we actually started to catch up on that deficit from the first couple of days until we hit the last day. The last day we were almost on target. We had to do 3 very strong dives to get everything we needed in the can. Unfortunately, the cold got passed to Kate, our lead actress, which made it much more difficult for her to go down and come back up again, and she was experiencing similar problems to the rest of the crew. So very, very sadly, we had to cancel one of those 3 dives and have a much longer kind of recovery period between dives 1 and 3, and it put a lot more pressure on dive 3. So we storyboarded again, we sacrificed a number of shots, but there were absolutely 8 shots that we had to get in the can on that last dive, which we'd never achieved. We'd never got more than 5 shots in a single dive, so 8 complicated shots was going to be a real struggle. But everybody pitched in really, really hard, and we rehearsed everything again and again and again on land. We made sure that everybody knew exactly what they wanted to get, and we went out for dive 2 on the final dive. This, I think, was the 18th, 19th dive of the trip. Lots and lots of pressure, but we got through and we nailed it. The team worked absolutely beautifully together, no mistakes. We actually managed to get a few takes. We got, I think, a minimum of 2 takes of every shot. Got some really, really nice results, and we managed to surface just in time, avoiding a few jellyfish on the way back up, with everybody completely safe, 8 shots in the can, and a very, very happy crew. We then took the last day of the dive off, as you'll have seen from the beginning of this video, because you can't dive on the same day you're flying, so we went off into the desert and had some fun with some camels and visited some Bedouin in the desert there as well. So really, really good shoot. You're going to be seeing some more of the footage and what we do with it over the next couple of weeks in the blog, but that's us for this week, and we will catch you next week at theunderwaterrealm.com.